Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of horns247.com, joined, as always, by our managing editor, Taylor Estes. Taylor, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Chip. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. We got football to talk about. We got Texas softball, first
Mhm.
unseeded team in the women's college World Series championship final. They're the zombies that can't be killed. Unbelievable. Texas baseball's in the super regional, and heck, even UT men's and women's track have the most participants in the NCAA Outdoor Championship starting this week in Eugene, Oregon. So, if you're a Texas Longhorn or a Longhorn fan, or even if you hate the Texas Longhorns, you are watching because they are starting to put it together now. Taylor, the one sport that, of course, everyone cares about the most for the Longhorns to put it together is football. And we had kind of a scary incident that we learned about here at Horns 24/7. Iowa State transfer receiver Tariq Milton was in a serious car accident on his way to Texas. He's from Bradenton, Florida, and he was in his 2019 Dodge Challenger Scat Pack, which, if you've ever seen those cars, they're awesome. He said it was his baby, and he was driving with his high school receivers coach, Anthony Rozier, and they were between Tallahassee and Pensacola on I-10 when all of a sudden a car with no headlights on is coming at them in their lane on I-10. Tariq Milton swerved, but the car did hit the passenger side of his car, pretty much totaled it. Fortunately, Anthony Rozier, his high school running backs coach, who was in the passenger front seat, the car impacted right behind that front seat, and they were okay. Now, Rozier had a concussion, some minor injuries, but they ended up being helped by a Alabama season ticket holder who was stopped, and after the crash, saw the crash, Kevin Sidner, and Sidner helped them get, because the car was undrivable, so he helped them get to Pensacola, helped them get in, brought them to a hotel, even made sure that they had a ride to the airport the next day. And this is just an unbelievable story. Tariq Milton saying he's happy and lucky to be alive, and is so grateful for Kevin Sidner, who the Alabama season ticket holder, who did what you I think we'd all like to think we would do if we
Right,
saw
yeah, the Good
a crash.
Samaritan there, yeah.
Right. And so and of course, it wasn't lost on both of them that Texas will be facing Alabama on September 10th. But yeah, Tariq Milton, fortunate, and he ended up, of course, making it on time to report for summer workouts and summer enrollment and all that. But that's unbelievably scary, Taylor.
It is, for sure, and, he called Sidner a real life angel, and that's true. I mean, what you said, Chip, I mean, you would hope all of us would react that way. Sometimes I think people don't when they're in the moment, but talk about a good Samaritan and just the ties, him being an Alabama season ticket holder, him, I thought that your quote when you, reported this earlier in the week, I thought your quote that Milton said was funny. It said, "We'll meet again on the 10th of September," talking about Sidner with Texas playing Alabama that day. But definitely a scary, scary situation. Very fortunate for Tariq Milton and his high school receivers coach to be alive, honestly. And man, they had some guardian angels watching over them. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah, because it was at night. It was 11:30 at night, and you don't. The car didn't have headlights on. The car was driven by police. Later told Tariq Milton, a drunk driver who went to jail, and that's just a horrifying situation. But I'll tell you this, Taylor, Tariq Milton. We talked about him when he agreed to go to Texas, and how coaches and teammates at Iowa State said he was such a good locker room presence. You can tell from this kid the way he looks at life that he is a good presence. Forget the fact that he had impressive numbers, especially his first 2 years at Iowa State. He can stretch the field. He's a 4-4 guy. This kid is a his parents did a great job. I mean, he's a well-rounded person, and someone who is going to end up being a really nice addition to this Texas football team, especially on a team that's looking for leadership. This is a fifth-year guy, and we'll see what he brings to the field. But more importantly, right now, it seems like he's bringing a great presence to that locker room.
And that's huge, Chip. I mean, there are so many locker room instances and issues that we had heard about last season, and things that really was difficult for Steve Sarkisian to iron out in his first year. And I think he was prepared for it to an extent, but the more guys that Texas can get in that locker room that are all on the same page, that have the same goal, that can erase the sense of doubt that has crept into the Texas locker room over the last few years, the here we go again mentality that we always talk about. And I bet some of our listeners are tired of hearing us say that, but it's been the case for Texas. That's the reality of the situation. And, guys like this can help erase that, you would hope, at least when it matters most. And the time where that starts is now in the summertime. This is where the team really has to keep one another accountable when the coaches aren't really around them, during summer workouts and team, led 7-on-7 and all of that type of stuff that goes on in these months. And these months are really, really crucial. And a lot of times they get overlooked, I think, from a fan and an outside perspective, because there's no games, there's no real practices. Coaches, a lot of them take vacations, in July, late June, after the official visits end there. And so it's kind of the overlooked period, but it's a very, very crucial period in any team building type of scenario for any college football team, and especially for a team that really needs to come together and have a camaraderie and have each other's back and hold each other accountable, which is something Texas hasn't really done. So the more the more that the Tariq Miltons, the Bijan Robinsons, the Roshan Johnsons, the leaders on the team, the more that they can really corral these guys and get them all on the same page. It starts now, and that really can pay dividends later in the season.
No doubt. And this has been an unbelievable offseason for a team that went 5-7. We've kind of a broken record on that, but every time you turn around, it seems there has been good news for
Right.
Texas this offseason, as far as the football team, and coming off that 5-7 year. And I mean, even down to Lincoln Riley leaving OU with Caleb Williams. I mean, if you're a Longhorns fan, you didn't want to see that guy again
No, yeah.
in the Red River Shootout, and now, or probably neither one of them. And so now you've got Brent Venables trying to get things figured out at OU. But it has been, and part of that offseason, Taylor was bringing in Gary Patterson, and Gary released a song, and I think it's a good song. I think people should listen to it. "The Day I Walk Away," and it's on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to your music. And he wrote this song about partly about him leaving TCU, and he didn't hold a press conference after he got fired, and he said, part of that was because I about you know well, he said after the Baylor game, which was the game right after he got fired, he decided, you know what, I'm just gonna write a song. And so now the song's out, and we know Gary loves to strum the guitar,
Mhm.
and we had a chance to talk to him and kind of get his thoughts on that, and how where he is, why he came to Texas to do his thing. And um, this guy, he really seems committed to trying to help the Longhorns right now, which I know still for a lot of people seems strange. He told a great story about a guy who was a Texas fan who came up to him and said, "Listen, man, I gotta apologize for all the horrible names I've called you the last 10 years." Because Gary was 7-3 against Texas. So it that's part of the offseason, this good offseason that Texas has been having.
It is, and if you did not read, last week's Insider, go back and check it out. It's actually free, so we made it, it was a good enough story to make it free this, week, or I guess last week, technically. We want Texas fans to be able to read it, but Chip did a really great job sitting down with a one-on-one with Gary Patterson, and, yeah, that story that you had said about the Texas fan that came up to him and apologized, I was laughing so hard as I was editing, the Insider, putting it together before we published it, but it is also interesting, Chip, to hear just his overall perspective on the Texas locker room too. I feel like when he was asked about that, it seemed like he was pretty straightforward, I guess would be the best way to say it. I mean, I'm trying to think if that even is, but his quote to you was, quote, "I don't know if anyone thinks the roster is everything they want it to be, but we have some good players, and I think we have good kids." That's for Sark to talk about, though. To me, I mean, he's a head coach. Gary Patterson knows what a locker room should be. What was your take on his response to that being kind of, vague in responding to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of question marks, and he's not sugarcoating it. And so they've got a big question mark at quarterback. There's talent there, we know, but how quickly can that talent adjust and get comfortable and get command of the offense and of the locker room, really? That's the one position where you don't really have a choice about being a leader. And Texas has some interesting dynamics at that position. We've talked about how, uh, Hudson Card's a quiet guy. Quinn Ewers is a laid back guy. Jordan Whittington said Ewers reminds him of a surfer. And what are these guys going to be like when they run into some adversity? What are they going to be like when they throw an interception in a big game? And how do they handle it? How do they rally their teammates? All of that. And then obviously on defense, there's a lot of stuff that needs to come together after last year's sort of just confounding uh, inability to get better as the season wore on. We always talk about the sign of a well-coached team is week to week improvement, and we didn't see that on defense last year. I mean, not until the last game, and that was after guys got benched
Right.
against Kansas State. Did you see the defense finally sort of bow up in that 22-17 win? And and so I think Gary's he doesn't hand out much praise. He didn't hand out a lot of praise at TCU. He's got a reputation as a taskmaster. I thought it was interesting that he talked about that. Like, people have this idea that Patterson's just a constant fire breather. And he said he appreciated Chris Del Conte as his athletic director at TCU because Del Conte would actually come to practice and see how he interacted with the kids, see how he taught them, and would sit in on game planning meetings and really tried to understand the day-to-day of the coaches at TCU, which Del Conte still does
Mhm.
at Texas. And so I think it's and of course I asked him about his relationship with Pete Kwiatkowski, and he said, "Good. I've known Pete a long time. I've known him and Jeff Choate, the Texas co-defensive coordinator, linebackers coach, from their days competing in the Mountain West when TCU would play against Boise, and Kwiatkowski and Choate were both at Boise under Chris Peterson." So, he said, and he didn't. He was serious about the talk to Sark. If you're going to ask me questions about players, talk to Sark. That's his deal. I'm not coaching players. I'm preparing the game plans. He's doing all the scouting. He scouted the first 5 opponents already. Their offenses: Louisiana Monroe, Alabama, UTSA, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and he was just getting started on OU, which now has. He said he's been studying Ole Miss film because Jeff Lebby, the new offensive coordinator at OU, came from Ole Miss, and so he loves that stuff. Gary's a junkie about doing the scout and coming up with his uh, tendencies for opponents' offenses so that they can be working on that stuff during the summer when coaches can meet with the players for 2 hours a week and all that stuff, and giving the players scripts that they need to be learning now in preparation for the season. So uh, he loves that day-to-day grind. He's not one of these, he's not like Mac Brown. He's not the great I mean, he is a great CEO. I mean, you don't last 20 years at a place and win a
Right.
Rose Bowl and 6 conference championships, but Gary's a coach. He said one of the things he really appreciated about Sark and can identify with Sark is the fact that Sark's a head coach who calls plays. Gary said, "I understand that. I did that at
Mhm.
TCU. It's a lot." And he also said head coaches are the best soldiers, the best assistants. Former head coaches, excuse me, former head coaches are the best soldiers and assistants to head coaches because they know what it takes and they know what kind of help they need.
Yeah, they know what
So,
good coaches look like and what bad coaches look like.
right. So I just thought it was interesting. I've always liked Gary. I know, he's emotional, he's fiery, but football's fiery and emotional. I mean, I love that the guy changed his shirt in the middle of a 31-point comeback against Oregon in the Alamo Bowl, still the biggest comeback in a bowl game in history. So, he admits it. He's like, how many coaches wrote a song for their final press conference at a place?
Instead of doing a farewell press conference or anything after being there 20 years, decides to write a song. I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, I still think my favorite nickname, and I gotta give it to I think it was Paulie Dreamer on our site, I think, who put it last year in our predictions game thread for Texas TCU. He called TCU the Sweat and Garys, and I still think that's the funniest like nickname for Gary Patterson, just because he is so fiery and intense and would sweat through his shirts in games, and you saw it all the time. I mean, one of my favorite things, Chip, is with 24/7 we have access to certain type of uh images, so like Getty images and like USA Today sports photos that we can use for articles. Well, anytime you go and look for a Gary Patterson picture to pull from either one of them, he's screaming, and almost he's either screaming or he is just staring down, the field or whatever it is with his team behind him. I mean, they're hilarious. They've and this is well before he's joined Texas. I've always just cracked up when I see Gary Patterson pictures in those databases because they're all the same. It is just like nonstop, and you're right. Football is a fiery sport. I mean, for goodness sakes, people put on full pads and go hit each other as hard as they can. So yeah, you need to have the fire in you. And I think, it's going to be, I think it's probably been a very interesting change of pace, I would say, probably for Gary Patterson to be in this situation after spending, 20 years being the fiery guy, being the head coach, the leader of a football program. I bet it probably took a little bit of time for him to adjust, but I think it's a great addition. And you're spot on when you talk about how that is also the off season that Texas has had. That's a huge part of it too. And another huge part of it, Chip, is coming up next weekend. I guess it would be next weekend. What's today? Yeah, next weekend is when five-star quarterback Arch Manning takes his official visit. That's another big thing for Texas. He is coming off of a Georgia official visit that he took over this past weekend. He's going to Texas the weekend of June 17th. So more, reason to be over at Horns 24/7 for sure, because we're going to have tons of coverage leading up to the Arch Manning visit and, during the official visit after it, the aftermath of that. And that could be another huge thing too, Chip, that really solidifies this offseason if Texas can really hit it out of the park with Arch Manning when he comes on campus June 17th.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's I've never seen anything like it for a team coming off 5-7 and look, you gotta have the players. You gotta have players, and Texas has not had the players to do better than they have. Let's be honest. They haven't had the quarterbacks. They haven't had the offensive line. They haven't had difference makers. We've talked to Michael Griffin. We've talked to Josh Thompson. You got to have difference makers, and they got to feed off each other. And we've talked about all the transition, all the change, all the coaching change, and 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 look, the culture. What you were saying about the summer and everything right now, it's enormous. The culture, whatever that was last year, it didn't work. The
No.
players weren't bought in, or you had bad apples contaminating the bunch. The culture has got to be stronger. It's got to be about accountability. It's got to be about players wanting to do it for each other. I mean, we'll talk about UT softball here in a minute, but they're doing it for each other, and that's when the magic happens. When the players are doing it for themselves, when they look around and say, "No one believes in us but us." You can turn it around. The question is, how committed are you? How committed are you to each other and getting it done? I mean, Dan Neal, who he and Derek Johnson are on the College Football Hall of Fame ballot right now. Congratulations to those guys. Dan Neal, All-American offensive lineman, said a lot of the players under John Mackovic back in the mid-90s when he was a player didn't identify with Mackovic, didn't feel connected to Mackovic, but they rallied around each other and said, "We're going to go do this for us." And they did. They won 3 conference championships, including the first, ever Big 12 championship in 1996 with that shocker over Nebraska. So that's where this thing has to go, and we'll see if they can get there. But a guy like Arch Manning, I mean, when you hear that the guy may want to come in and learn for a year
Hmm.
and then really be considered, as part of the competition. Now, listen, things change, but he's saying the right things, and that's the kind of um, player personality that you want. Coming into your locker room. Of course, he's got the pedigree and he can make all the throws, but look, you can win big without being able to make all the throws. You got to be a good teammate. You got to be able to read the other side of the ball, whether you're a defensive player or an offensive player. And then you got to be able to help your teammates get lined up correctly and make plays. And Arch Manning certainly fits all of that from what I can tell.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a huge, official visit weekend that is coming up for Texas. Is not just Arch Manning, but obviously all eyes are going to be on Arch Manning for this. But you're right, Chip, when you talk about him, and him potentially not wanting to have to be the guy like right away, that bodes really well in Texas' favor. And so far, I feel Texas has done a really outstanding job when it's come to the overall recruitment of him because you hear, and if the guys who know the most about this are Hudson Standish and Mike Roach. They'll probably talk about it for sure this week on the State of Recruiting podcast too, so make sure you're tuning into those as well. But the thing with him is when you have a guy like an Arch Manning is kind of similar to like how Quinn Ewers is one of those type of recruits, that only come around once every, few years or whatever, the top guys. A lot of times they have a I don't know if a stigma is the right word, but like people expect them to kind of be prima donnas or divas or things like that. And it's the outside opinion, but these guys are totally the opposite. And Arch Manning 100% is. He's not the flashy type of the look at me type of guy. He's more of a laid back. He kind of reminds me from what everything, in hearing about him, he kind of sounds similar to how Quinn Ewers is a little bit when you talk to people who know Quinn Ewers, like when we had Riley Dodge on our podcast and him talking about he just cares about playing football and hunting and hanging out. And that's kind of, an Arch Manning, it probably fits more in that mold. You probably don't think that way when, he's the number 1 rated prospect in the country. You have, he goes to a college game and every publication is talking about him being at that game, and that was his junior year of high school when that was happening. I mean, that's the type of thing. But Texas has really done a great job when it comes to just having more of the low key approach with him, and so it's going to be fascinating to see what this next, not this coming weekend, the weekend after that, when he comes in for his official visit, kind of how things play out for Texas there. But they're doing a great job without a doubt at this point. And again, when we talk about that, talk about the offseason, the fact that they're in it, one of the two teams for the most part in it with Arch Manning, the number one prospect in the 2023 recruiting class, coming off of a 5-7 season, it just goes to show that one thing I think that we're learning about this Texas staff is they're able to keep recruits engaged and sell their message in a way that makes them intrigued. And Arch Manning is a perfect prime example of that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. This is an exciting time to be a Longhorn, and Taylor, you know, we during these summer months we talk about the players who, we'll talk about the other teams in the Big 12 this summer. We'll talk about a little bit of everything, but the guys who can elevate Texas the most. I look at three players, and you mentioned, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I do feel like Quinn Ewers um, has a, a, a spark from what we saw in, even in his time at South Lake Carroll, coming back from the double hernia, leading them to the state championship game ahead of schedule. Yes, they lost to Westlake, but he might not have even should have been playing in that game, but he's got a moxie, and I think players are drawn to him from what I'm hearing. And nothing against Hudson Card. I think Hudson Card's super talented. I just don't know if his makeup is right for the quarterback position. I hope he proves me wrong. I hope he has the best fall camp ever. But Quinn Ewers obviously is the number one recruit in the 2021 cycle. Tells you this
Mhm.
kid is seen by a lot of analysts as a guy who has the goods. And look, he threw a lot of interceptions in the spring, a lot. Like, if fans knew how many he threw, they'd be like worried. So he's got to get that cleaned up, but that's what the summer's all about. And so, you know, I don't know if I should stop there and let you comment before I get to the other two players.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously everybody's looking at Quinn Ewers, and it's kind of, as you mentioned with Hudson Card, he's kind of flying under the radar here. It's going to be, interesting to see how this kind of plays out in fall camp. But you're right. I mean, when you just look at it from aside from what we're hearing behind the scenes, and players being drawn to Quinn Ewers, look at what is posted on Texas social media channels. Who is always seems to be there with other players around? It's Quinn Ewers. I mean, when there was a picture of the receivers going to Top Golf during the spring, and there's one quarterback there, and it's Quinn Ewers. And then, just there's a lot of things. When Jordan Addison was taking his visit to Texas, there was pictures posted with, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, Isaiah Nayor, and then Quinn Ewers is in the pictures too. I mean, that's not an accident, I don't think. I think that's very telling of, what and matching, I would say, of what we have heard behind the scenes of how players really are drawn to him. But you're right, it starts there. But um, you know, and I'll let you get to your next two players too. But the other thing that we have to consider when we're talking about Quinn Ewers, yeah, he needs to help elevate Texas, but he needs an offensive line to allow him to elevate Texas, and that remains a question, Chip.
Yeah, it does. And I have a feeling we'll be talking about the offensive line a little bit later. But another player among three players, I think, who can really elevate Texas, if they can elevate, is linebacker Jalen Ford, because everything that I heard in the spring is that this guy he's got all the measurables. He loves the game. His teammates believe in him, and maybe they believe in him more than he believes in himself. And he's got to, and it sounded like he was starting to make it his defense, which is a lot, but that's what they need from that position, from that middle linebacker position. And nothing against Luke Brockermeyer, who, fought his butt off and was second leading tackler on the team. But Jalen Ford physically is built
Mm.
like a middle linebacker. He's built like a middle linebacker in the NFL. Now, if he can play to that level and get everyone lined up correctly, then this defense starts to take on a whole different personality than it had last year. And so Jalen Ford is a guy I think who can elevate this defense if he can continue to keep coming on.
Yeah, and you're right when you talk about, the middle linebacker, that needs to be I think it needs to be kind of the glue of the defense. And as you're saying, make sure everyone's lined up, make sure the plays are being passed along on the field to everybody so that they know what they're supposed to be doing. And that's huge. And you're right. I mean, when I kind of feel for Luke Brockmeyer, I'll say that because he's a walk-on who earned his starting playing time. Whether you want to say he earned it because of there being a lack of other options, I don't care what it is. He earned the right to be on the field, but you don't necessarily want to have to rely on a former walk-on to be the glue in the center of your defense at middle linebacker. It's just that I don't think any coach out there, if you were just to give a blanket, A or B, which would you prefer without any names attached, I think that they would obviously prefer a guy that's a scholarship player that has the physical tools that earned him a scholarship from the jump and not just a walk on. So I think you're 100% right. I think that's something the Texas defense has been lacking. I mean, I'm trying to think back to when the last time they had a middle linebacker like that. I mean, was it?
It was probably Gary Johnson, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Yeah, Gary Johnson's probably the last one, but that was in 2018. I mean, we're 2022 now, so Texas needs that for sure.
Yeah. And that's a position that the fact that you just had to say, I can't remember
Yeah,
the last impact interior linebacker Texas has had. That's unacceptable. It's
right.
unacceptable at Texas. And the third player I think who can really elevate this defense and this team is Anthony Cook. And Anthony Cook, we know, played nickel last year, made plays, had a really big third down sack against TCU that helped in that one possession game. Came off the field sometimes when they were in base defense. And to me, he's too good of a player to take off the field. We got to see how he transitions to safety, but that typically is a good transition. When you're moving from corner or nickel to safety, I'm not going to say it's easier because it's not. You've got more responsibility, more calls. But Anthony Cook is a guy, they need a playmaker at safety. I mean, we talked to Michael Griffin and how there was a runway of players waiting to get on the field who all ended up in the NFL. I mean, there was a succession of safeties when you talk about Michael Griffin and Earl Thomas and that defensive backfield has to be a strength, and it wasn't last year. And so this they need confidence. You got to have playmakers. When you walk out on the field, you can't be worried about what the guy next to you is or isn't going to do. You have to be able to trust that guy so that you can totally focus on your job. And that's been a problem. It's been a
Mhm.
problem for about 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's too much. And so Anthony Cook can elevate this team and this defense by being that steady, consistent playmaker who helps his teammates also get in position to make plays.
Yeah, and he knows the secondary as a whole. I mean, he's now in his third, role in the secondary. He's a fifth-year senior. I mean, this is the time for him. I mean, he has a huge opportunity here too, to really make a name for himself. Because I mean, if you go back when he was a recruit, he was a very highly touted recruit, and he saw the field early at Texas, and then just kind of like teetered off. And so it was really encouraging, Chip, to see him make his way back into a difference maker type of role last season on defense. Even though he did come off the field at some points, I think I think you and I would agree that he was one of the more I guess consistent and stable, playmaker out there for the defense in general when he was on the field. I think him and Josh Thompson were probably two of the more consistent playmakers that they did have on Texas defense. And, with there's still a little bit of a question mark following him since he is moving to a different position. But I think that he seems to be, capable enough and trustworthy enough for the coaches to rely on him to play at the safety position after playing nickel and then corner previously, because I think they also need him to help kind of be the Jalen Ford too, with making sure guys are lined up right, making sure everyone knows their assignments in the secondary, passing along what the plays are from the sideline to the other guys on the field, the opposite sides of the field. I mean, there's so many things that he is probably the most set up to being successful at, just because he's a fifth year guy and he knows that secondary, knows all the positions at it. So Texas needs him to, though. He's got to answer it. He's got to prove that just last year wasn't just an anomaly type of thing where he, started to look like the guy that people expected him to be when he came out of high school. And so he's got to take that next step. And that will be, I totally agree. I think it'll be detrimental to the success of this defense and this team in general.
Well, Taylor, before we get to love it or leave it, Texas baseball and Texas softball and Texas track are all trying to position themselves here in the postseason to win a national championship. UT softball's in the championship series against rival nemesis and behemoth number one Oklahoma. But Texas baseball gets through its regional undefeated and impressive wins over Air Force, a team they lost a game to during the season. And they're going to play East Carolina. And East Carolina is a team that is very similar to Texas, in my opinion. East Carolina is one of the best fielding teams in college baseball. Texas is the best, but East Carolina is top 4 in the nation in fielding percentage. They come up with timely hitting. They don't have a guy like Ivan Melendez, but they've got a healthy dose of guys with double-digit home runs. They got 4 players batting over 300, and Bryson Worrell, the senior outfielder, was named the most outstanding player of the regional for East Carolina, and he's got 18 home runs. I mean, he would be the closest thing to their version of Ivan Melendez. 57 RBIs, but they play well together. You look at their resume, they're like 2-6 against ranked opponents. Their best win is over Maryland, who's now number 10 in the nation. But they had a 20-game winning streak going into their regional. They ended up losing a game to Coastal Carolina and had to win against Coastal Carolina on Monday to wrap up that regional. But before that loss, they'd won 20 straight games. Taylor, you and I both know when a team wins, puts together a streak like that, they play for each other. They're a team that isn't afraid. They've come back like Texas. Texas has come back in a lot of games this year. East Carolina has too. So, honestly, I looked at the resumes and I thought, Texas probably should have been the number 8 seed. In East Carolina having to come to Texas, but it's not. East Carolina is the 8 seed. Texas is the 9 seed. They're fighting for the right to open with Tennessee in the College World Series, but it's going to be a good test. And their number 1 pitcher is a lefty, just like Texas. And so, keep an eye on CJ Mayhew. I think he'll get the start in game 1 against Pete Hansen. And, Mayhew has been their most consistent starter, and they've struggled to find consistency with their pitching staff beyond their top 2 pitchers, CJ Mayhew and Carter Spivey. Love that name. But they scrap and they fight. They field really well. Like I said, they don't make mistakes. They don't beat themselves, and they play small ball. They are top 4 in the nation in sacrifice bunts. So Augie Garrido will be smiling somewhere as Texas and East Carolina get things going here on Friday.
Yeah, and you're right when you talk about the win streak there. I mean, winning 21 of 22 games in the heading into and then in the postseason, that's a team you don't really want to mess with. I mean, let's just say it how it is. I mean, that's just a team you don't want to really get. And I will say though, with Texas, I feel like things seem to be coming back together after there were some ups and downs a little bit during the season. But And I think at this point, Chip, if you're playing for Texas, they've got to come together for Ivan Melendez in general. I mean, man, the season this kid is having, I don't want to see it end in Greenville. I want to see him in Omaha. I want to see him on the national stage where everybody can see what he's doing. Cause I mean, he has 30 bombs right now. And he is the first player to reach 30 home runs in a single season since 2013 when Chris Bryant did that. And if you follow baseball, you know that that's probably not too shabby of a person to be compared to, considering he was the number 2 overall draft pick, I think,
No
in that
doubt.
same season. So, yeah, I mean, it's Ivan Melendez is having himself a year. He's for the Golden Spikes Award. If you haven't, go over and vote for him. Fans can vote, I think, once a day or something because this kid deserves it. And I think that this team should be fighting for him. I mean, let's see Texas have a Golden Spikes winner, and Ivan Melendez is poised to be that guy if they can really make it through and make it to Omaha. I think that could be the icing on the cake if he can get on that national stage there. But going to be a big challenge for sure, Chip, that they're going to have to get through this week.
Well, I thought one of the best signs for Texas coming out of the regional was the last win over Air Force, where you had Travis Staley, you had Andre Duplantier, you had some of and Jared Southard, who, some of the relievers who'd been up and down struggled with control throughout the year, started off the season strong. Then the Tanner Witt injury seemed to just unravel this team in a way that I don't think any of us expected, or maybe unraveled the pitching
Yeah.
bullpen. And so to see Travis Staley, Jared Southard, Andre Duplantier, even LeBaron Johnson perform well in that final regional victory over Air Force, man, that's what you want, because like UT softball struggled early in the year. Heck, their starting pitching, Haley Dulcini and Estelle Check, who are killing it. And Estelle Check's going to be the number 1 starter probably next year. Or Sophia Simpson, the freshman who threw a no-hitter in her 5th appearance for the Longhorns. They are putting it together in the postseason. If Texas baseball can do that as well, Tristan Stevens, all the other pitchers I just mentioned, along with Pete Hansen and Lucas Gordon, then you're going to see the Longhorns, who started the year number 1 and were the team to beat. And again, you're fighting for the right to play number 1 Tennessee to open the College World Series, which is rough. But Texas has beaten Tennessee already this year, and so let's see what happens. Let's see if Texas can go on the road, like UT softball. UT softball 6-0 in elimination games. Had to go to Washington. Had to go to Arkansas and get it done after dropping the first game of that super regional. So just a lot of fun and excitement right now. If you like baseball and softball and comebacks and guts and just Texas fight,
Yeah.
you're
Texas.
loving watching these teams.
Yeah, for sure. In Texas and East Carolina will play at 11 a.m. on ESPN2. Texas softball, though, they play tonight, I believe, at 7 o'clock in the Women's College World Series finals. And this softball team, I thought it was hilarious yesterday or Tuesday, excuse me, when Chip released his morning brew. What was your headline again? He had a headline. I think it
The
was
zombie apocalypse.
Zombie apocalypse. That's what it was. And that's what you're right. What Texas softball's, it's like the Walking Dead. They're coming back and going after anyone they'll have. And they have a tough task, though, Chip, in facing number 1 Oklahoma starting
Oh,
tonight.
I mean, Oklahoma leads the nation in batting average, ERA, home runs, scoring. They're unbelievable. Jocelyn Alo, who had 2 home runs in that 15-0 rout of UCLA to move on to the championship series. She wears number 78, and she's the leadoff hitter. She's from Hawaii. Her dad is awesome. He wears this T-shirt of her in the crowd. And of course, they're playing in Oklahoma City, 9 miles from Norman. So, but Texas stared down Oklahoma State, and Kelly Maxwell, the All-American lefty pitcher who no one had solved, from the Longhorns. They were 0-4 against the Cowgirls throughout the season. And then when it matters most, elimination games, they go 2-0. And Mike White, I love this coach. He says, my team's the most dangerous team in the postseason. They're playing free. No one expects them to do anything. Oklahoma's got all the pressure, but Oklahoma is so talented. I mean, they have 3 aces. They have 3 ace pitchers, top 4 in ERA in the nation. Kelly Troutwine and Jordy Barr, the freshman who struts around the mound like she's ready to fight someone. This is going to be, if Texas can take down this, defending national champion number 1 OU, it would be an unbelievable story we'd be talking about for years. I mean, even Kat Osterman is in Oklahoma City cheering this team on. And Kat Osterman never got to the championship series.
Right.
She made it College World Series 3 times, but Texas had never been to the championship series. So exciting times.
Yeah, it is. And I kind of hate when people use this sports reference, but it is, I think, can play here. Is kind of a David versus Goliath type of matchup. And I know that I don't know, it's such a corny thing that people overuse. And I can't believe I'm even saying it, but it is. And if Texas can truly, get the spirit and the strength of David in this against this Goliath type of matchup, it's going to be fun to watch. But talk about, Chip, just a gift to all of college sports. I mean, we literally have a national championship on the line, and the 2 teams playing are Texas and Oklahoma. Like, what better story can you have? I mean, it would, like, 2 of the biggest rivals, like, people, even if they don't care about Texas and Oklahoma, they know about the rivalry, and these are the 2 teams playing in the finals of the Women's College World Series. I mean, you can't ask for a better setup here. From an outside perspective, I think Texas probably would have hoped it wasn't Oklahoma that they are facing, but this is a red hot team right now, and they're fun to watch. And it's kind of one of those where you don't want to face these type of teams in the off season or in the postseason, excuse me. And Texas softball is one of those teams that you should be a little scared to face. And there's definitely up for they have a big task ahead, a big challenge ahead starting tonight against Oklahoma. Again, that game starts at 7 p.m. But just overall, I mean, this is just a great, such a great postseason softball in general, but just such a great finals. The fact that there's 2 of the most storied rivalries playing each other for a national championship doesn't happen very often.
No. And for those who turned off their TV when Texas fell behind 5-0 to Oklahoma State in that regional, or the clincher to get into the championship series, you now know that the Texas softball team is they're like zombies. You can't kill them.
Yeah.
And this is a best 2 of 3. So tonight, tomorrow night, and Friday night this week, if necessary, obviously on Friday, but this is not an elimination game here in game 1. So let's see what the Longhorns can do against Troutwine. She's got a sub-1 ERA, just a strikeout machine. So Texas did beat Oklahoma during the regular season and ended their 40-game winning streak dating back to last year's national championship run. So they know they can win. Now they got to go out and do it twice in the next 3 games. So Taylor, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I am, Chip. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stick around because we have more football talk and postseason Texas action coming up in Love It or Leave It. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here. Chip, you ready for some Love It or Leave It here?
Oh yeah.
All righty. First one is love it or leave it. The Texas offense has to be significantly better than last year for the Longhorns to have the kind of success the team wants in 2022.
I'll be a little more specific on this. I'm gonna leave this because I think the offensive line doesn't have to be that much better, Taylor. they just got to be able to get in the way of someone. The skill talent now for Texas is ridiculous. When you talk about Bijan Robinson, Roshan Johnson, Keelan Robinson, I mean, it's ridiculous what Texas has in the running back room, and then at receiver, you've got big guys who can fly, big catch radius. Texas couldn't make a contested catch last year. Now you bring in guys who are known for making contested catches, like Isaiah Nayer and Ajayi Hall and Tariq Milton. The offensive line just needs to get in the way of people and give Quinn Ewers or Hudson Card or whoever's taking the snaps, or give a crease to Bijan Robinson. I don't think it has to be significantly better, Taylor. Just a little bit better on the offensive line. Don't make mistakes. Don't make pre-snap penalties in the third quarter when you're coming off your own goal line against Oklahoma in a game where the momentum has swung the other way. It's just about making a little bit better, just be a little bit better on the offensive line with this skill talent. I just think, it doesn't have to be significant, Taylor, just a little bit better. So I'm going to leave this. How about you?
I mean, I'm gonna love it because I think the offensive line was so bad last year that it's like I think it needs a substantial improvement. It's kind of a weird. It's kind of one of those like either or type of things, I guess. But y- maybe I do want to leave it. I'm trying to think because really the offensive line needs to get guys out of the running backs' ways and get guys out of the face of the quarterbacks. Where last year I feel like they were getting in the way of their own players instead of the opposite team. And so I guess I'll say I'll love it because that needs to be significantly better. And I yeah, I'll love it. I mean, it's any improvement is what we're looking for from the offensive line, and any improvement from the offensive line is going to improve the offense as a whole in general. It's going to improve the quarterback play. It's going to improve the running game. It's going to just be a difference maker for all of it. And so it doesn't have to be an all American offensive line, but it needs to be significantly better than last year because last year was so bad. So I think it's kind of weird. Like I'll love it because it has to be significantly better than last year, but that's not saying much. I mean, that's like saying, who's I don't know what to. I was just going to use a bad expression, so I'm not going to say that. But it's like you want to see improvement. It was also one of the worst position groups on the field last year, so any type of improvement is going to look significant. So I guess I'll say I'll love it there. I don't know.
Okay. Love it or leave it. Number 2.
All right, number 2. Love it or leave it. People are overestimating how good the Texas quarterback position will be in 2022.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna love this because every Texas fan right now thinks that A, Quinn Ewers is gonna be the quarterback, and B, Quinn Ewers is gonna play like Vince Young, because they were both the number one recruit in the entire nation in their respective recruiting classes. And people need to remember Vince Young was a redshirt in 2002 who played a little bit in 2003 before really settling in and becoming a monster in 2004. So, yeah, they're overestimating how good the Texas quarterback position will be. But the hope is, Taylor, that the quarterback doesn't have to do everything. That because you have Bijan Robinson, because you have receivers who can turn short receptions into long touchdown plays or even just a first down, because you are stressing the defense by having so many talented skill players, you have to account for Xavier Worthy. Here comes Isaiah Nayer and Ajayi Hall. They're 6'3" and can run like the wind. There's Jordan Whittington going over the middle, who's a grown man. He looks like a running back in the NFL. He's so put together that your quarterback not going to have to do everything. He's not going to have to be Colt McCoy in 2008 when it seemed like it was him and, you know, or 2009, excuse me,
2009, yeah, with him and
when it seemed like it was just him and Jordan Shipley.
yeah,
So,
with the offensive
um,
line, that's terrible.
yeah,
Really
so
fast.
I'm gonna love this, but hopefully, the quarterback doesn't have to do everything. How about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna love it, and I agree with you. I think Texas fans are just getting ahead of themselves a little bit when it comes to the quarterback play, the quarterback room. Not surprising. I mean, I feel like there have been a number of times where, especially when it comes to quarterbacks, Texas fans anoint them as the next, the second coming of Vince Young, and you always, as you mentioned, and I feel like we talk about a lot on the Flagship podcast, especially ever since Quinn Ewers did come to Texas, is Vince Young did not start his first year. He did not start his second year. He started his third year, but he wasn't the Vince Young that took Texas to the national championship until, he was into his third year. And so this is, I think Texas fans are definitely overestimating it. The other thing is, I think that, they're the very high expectations for Quinn Ewers, or if it's Hudson Card, whatever. I mean, how can you have that when Texas couldn't even field, a full offensive line in a spring game because of that's how limited their numbers were. And so there's all these guys coming on campus. We've talked about it in depth about how Texas is almost certainly going to rely on at least one, if not two, possibly more true freshman offensive linemen. And there's a chance that those guys have yet to go through a college practice yet. So that's not the situation that any coach wants to be in. That's not a situation any offensive line coach wants to be in. That's the situation, unfortunately, that Texas is in for a number of reasons that a lot of them are outside the control of this staff. But they do have their guys coming in and on campus now, that offensive line haul from the 2022 signing class. But still, I mean, it, relying on that much inexperience or, having that many questions on the offensive line and then expecting like some elite level of quarterback play from a guy that has not played, has not started a college football game, that's asking for way too much. And I think that the expectations are way too high right now. They're overestimating how good the quarterback position can be. And that's not a knock on Quinn Ewers or Hudson Card. It's just I think they're overestimating it without thinking about the guys in front of them who have to protect those quarterbacks. If the offensive line doesn't do its job, the quarterback position is not going to look very good. And if the offensive line does its job, quarterback position may look great, and we'll be having a different conversation, in the season potentially. But even then, we still are dealing with two inexperienced quarterbacks. Texas doesn't know who the starter is. I think everyone's pointing to Quinn Ewers, but still, I mean, there's a lot of questions for both him and Hudson Card. So yeah, there's no doubt that Texas fans, or a lot of people, are overestimating how good the quarterback position will be. And again, that's not a knock on either of the guys. It's just there's other factors that play into the success or lack of success from the quarterback position. It all starts up front.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, love it or leave it, number 3.
Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze there. Love it or leave it. The Texas softball team's run to the championship final of the Women's College World Series is the best sports story of the year for the Longhorns.
I mean, this is like asking a parent to pick between, who's their favorite child.
I was always my parents' favorite child, so I don't know.
Well, then you might have a different answer than I have for this. I'm going to leave this because, my goodness, Texas has won 4 national championships already for the 2021-22 school year, indoor track, women's tennis, you've got men's golf
Rowing.
and oh good heavens.
Rowing, right?
Rowing.
Yeah.
And one of those isn't even Eddie Reese.
Yeah.
For crying out loud. He finished second. But there's some great storylines among those national championship runs. I mean, if you haven't watched our Flagship podcast interview with John Fields, the Texas golf coach, talking about, his team and Pearson and Parker Cootie, the twins, and Cole Hammer, the three amigos, they call them, making it to the championship final against Stanford as freshmen. And then, COVID, and then injuries and fatigue, and they finished 25th last year and then come back and get it done. It's just hard to pick. They're all fantastic. This story, the UT women's softball team is fantastic. But remember, they started the year number 10. I mean, Haley Dulcini is no slouch. She transferred from Fresno State, but she's legit. And you saw it. She shut down Oklahoma State over the final 4 innings of that 6-5 come from behind win. She's got talent, and this team's got talent. So they're unseeded and they're zombies and they're 6-0 in elimination games. Now, if they take down Oklahoma, Taylor, I might have a different answer, but I'm gonna leave this. No disrespect. You've already got 4 other national championship teams.
Yeah.
How about you?
Man, I kind of want to love it and leave it a little bit because I agree. I mean, you don't want to overlook the teams that have won the national championship, and there's as you mentioned, there's 4 that Texas already has. So I feel like that's doing a little bit of a disservice to those programs. But I also, on the flip side, I love how this team has come together. I think you're spot on with your zombie apocalypse analogy of this team. And I always kind of love those type of stories. So that's where I do want to love it. So, but at the same time, I think that would be too much of a slight to the teams that did actually win the national championship. Now, I agree with you. Next, we'll know by next recording of the Flagship podcast if Texas softball will take down, Goliath and number 1 Oklahoma. I will have a different answer. I would be loving this question if that was already the case. So we'll see next week. But yeah, I'm going to agree with you. And I'm going to leave it just for the time being. But I don't want to disregard or, not give proper respect to what Texas softball has been doing in this postseason, especially.
Well, it's an unbelievable time if you're following the Texas Longhorns. To get over to horns247.com. We've got you covered from start to finish in all of the sports we've just talked about.
Yeah,
In
we
addition
covered all of
to
the other sports too, not just
That's right.
football, baseball, basketball like normal in recruiting. So
That's right. We cover it all, baby. And as we mentioned, with Arch Manning coming in for a big visit and all the summer workouts and scoop that you need to know heading into the 2022 football season, we'll be hanging out waiting for you over at horns247.com. And until next time, right here on the Flagship podcast for Taylor Estes, I'm Chip Brown. Stay safe and keep the faith.